Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. In a quiet manor shrouded by night, a single candle flickers and then another. Two flames, two lives intertwined, and one destined to burn out before dawn. The Candle Burns Twice is a tale where love turns to deceit, and the soft glow of wax hides the darkest of secrets. When tragedy strikes under the dim light, Hercule Poirot is called to unravel a mystery that burns brighter than truth itself. Every shadow dances with guilt. Every whisper hides a confession. And in the end, only the sharp mind of Poirot can tell which flame was meant to die first. Stay until the end, for when the final candle fades, so will every lie. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales, where every mystery leaves its mark in the dark. Chapter 1: Shadows Before the Flame. The wind had turned bitter by the time Hercule Poirot's motorcar rolled through the narrow, tree-lined lane that led to Haversham Hall. It was the kind of wind that carried whispers, not of the living, but of the house itself, as though the old stones remembered every secret they had ever heard. Poirot sat back, gloved hands folded neatly over his cane, his expression calm, almost serene. The countryside blurred past, damp and gray beneath the lowering October sky. He had been summoned by an old acquaintance, Lady Eleanor Haversham, a woman whose poise and restraint had long been admired by London society, and whose sudden distress had caught Poirot's attention. She had written only one line in her letter: "Monsieur Poirot, there has been a death, and yet the dead will not rest." The words had intrigued him. Death, in Poirot's world, rarely traveled alone. It brought with it confusion, concealment, and, most of all, human folly. As the car drew up before the grand, ivy-choked entrance of Haversham Hall, Poirot noted the faint scent of candle wax on the evening air. The house glowed faintly from within, every window flickering with yellow light, as though an invisible hand had lit each candle moments before his arrival. "Welcome to Haversham Hall, monsieur," said the butler, a thin, hollow-cheeked man named Finch. His eyes were downcast, his voice heavy with restrained grief. "Lady Eleanor awaits you in the drawing-room." Poirot nodded courteously and followed the man through the echoing corridors. The carpets were thick, the portraits severe. Each step seemed to disturb the hush that blanketed the house. Somewhere, far off, a clock chimed 7, though its echo seemed to linger longer than it should. Lady Eleanor rose as Poirot entered. She was elegant even in mourning, her black gown perfectly pressed, her silver hair drawn back. Only her eyes betrayed her composure, eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and the kind of fear that logic could not explain. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I am so grateful you came." He inclined his head. When an old friend calls for help, "Madame," Hercule Poirot does not hesitate. "You say there has been a death." "Yes," she whispered. "My husband, Lord Henry Haversham, passed 3 nights ago." Peacefully, the doctor said. "But since then," she paused, trembling slightly. "Since then, things have not been peaceful." Poirot's brows lifted gently. "You will explain?" "Of course. Henry's death was sudden, but not entirely unexpected. He had been unwell for months. The heart, they said. We held the funeral yesterday morning. And last night," she took a deep breath. "Last night, the candle beside his portrait lit itself." Poirot regarded her in silence for a long moment. "Lit itself?" "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "No one touched it. We had extinguished every light before retiring. But when Finch came down at dawn, the candle was burning again, just as it had been on the night Henry died." Poirot's eyes softened. "A curious thing indeed, madam. But candles do not burn without cause. There must be, how do you English say, a rational explanation." "I hope so," she murmured. "But this morning, the same thing happened again. The candle burns twice. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the tall windows, beyond which the sky had turned a bruised shade of violet. He had seen grief take many forms: anger, denial, delusion. Yet Lady Eleanor's trembling sincerity suggested something deeper than hysteria. He spoke gently. "Perhaps, Lady Haversham, you would permit me to observe this phenomenon myself?" She nodded. "Of course. Tonight, at midnight. The candle stands in the west gallery. I cannot bear to go near it again." Poirot inclined his head. "Then I shall go in your place." The house came alive as night deepened. Poirot took his supper in the small dining room, attended by Finch, whose silence was as oppressive as the flicker of the lamps. Across the table, a young woman, slender, sharp-eyed, studied Poirot with barely concealed curiosity. "You must forgive me," she said at last. "I am Miss Clara Whitby, Lady Eleanor's niece. I've heard a great deal about you, Monsieur Poirot. You're rather a legend in our circles." Poirot smiled modestly. "Ah, mademoiselle flatters me. But tell me, you live here at Haversham Hall?" "For the time being," she said, sipping her wine. "My aunt needed company after my uncle's passing. Not that she lacks for company. The servants whisper enough to fill the rooms. Half of them think the candle's cursed." "And what do you think, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, eyes twinkling. Clara tilted her head. "I think grief makes people see what they want to see. My uncle was not a kind man. There are those who might feel his presence lingering, for better or worse." Poirot noted the hesitation in her tone, the flicker of something sharp behind her calm demeanor. "Yes," he said softly, "the dead do not always rest, particularly when the living disturb their peace." Before Clara could reply, Finch entered with a telegram in hand. "For you, Miss Whitby. Arrived from London." She took it quickly, read, and folded it without comment. Yet Poirot noticed her hand tremble, ever so slightly. "Excuse me," she murmured, rising. "I'll take this upstairs." Poirot watched her go, his mind already weaving its quiet threads. There was something in her manner, not grief, not guilt, but tension, a thread pulled taut. By 11, the house had fallen silent. Poirot walked the long corridor toward the west gallery, the only sound the measured tap of his cane against the marble floor. The gallery itself was vast, lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow him as he passed. At the far end stood the portrait of Lord Henry Haversham, a tall man, severe of expression, his hand resting upon the arm of a high-backed chair. Beneath it stood a small table of polished oak, and upon that table the candle. It was an ordinary candle, ivory white, melted unevenly along one side. Yet there was something uncanny about the way it stood, as though waiting. Poirot checked his watch. 11:45. He settled into a chair near the far wall, pulling it slightly into shadow. From his pocket, he withdrew a small notebook, his constant companion. He noted the placement of the candle, the direction of the draught from the nearby window, the faint scent of lavender polish lingering in the air. Then he waited. Midnight struck. At first, nothing. Only the deep toll of the clock echoing through the corridors, slow and solemn. Then a flicker, a faint, tremulous glow at the candle's base. Poirot leaned forward, unblinking. The wick caught. The flame rose, steady, golden. Poirot rose silently, stepping closer. The air around the candle felt neither warm nor charged. No sound of footsteps, no movement in the hall. Only the faint whisper of the wind beyond the glass. He examined the base of the candle. No wires, no mechanism, no trace of phosphorus or chemical trickery that might ignite by heat or moisture. Nothing but wax and wick. And yet it burned. Poirot stood very still. Then he smiled faintly. The following morning, the house was abuzz with murmurs. Finch swore he had heard footsteps in the gallery around midnight, soft, deliberate. Clara insisted she had seen a shadow moving past her door. Lady Eleanor refused to descend for breakfast, claiming she had dreamed of Henry standing at the foot of her bed, candle in hand. Poirot, however, appeared serene as ever. He took tea in the library, his gaze moving from shelf to shelf as though seeking something hidden among the dust and paper. "Finch," he said suddenly, "tell me, who else resides in the house?" The butler hesitated. "Only Lady Eleanor, Miss Whitby, and myself, monsieur. There is also the maid, Lucy, and the gardener, though he sleeps in the cottage beyond the orchard. No one else." Poirot's tone was mild, but precise. Finch hesitated again. "Well, Mr. James Haversham arrived yesterday, the late lord's nephew. He inherited a portion of the estate, I believe." Poirot nodded slowly. "And where is this Mr. Haversham now?" "In the east wing, sir. Finch stopped, his composure faltering. "He had words with Lady Eleanor last night. Over the will." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "There is always a will." He rose, setting aside his cup. "If you would be so kind, Finch, ask Mr. Haversham to join me here." James Haversham was a tall, lean man with the strained elegance of one who had never earned his wealth but had learned to spend it well. His eyes were pale, his smile easy but insincere. "You wanted to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Indeed," said Poirot. "I wish to understand your uncle's passing, and the curious events that followed." James laughed lightly. "Ah, the famous candle. I'm afraid my aunt's imagination has been running wild." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "And yet, when I observed the candle last night, it burned, though no hand had touched it." James raised an eyebrow. "Did it really? How fascinating. Perhaps the old man's ghost wished to greet you." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You do not seem distressed by these manifestations." "Why should I be? My uncle and I were not close. His death, though unfortunate, was hardly a tragedy to those who knew him." He paused, smirking faintly. "Besides, I've seen stranger things in London clubs than a candle lighting itself." Poirot's smile did not waver. "And yet, monsieur, I suspect the candle's flame burns not for the dead, but for the living." James frowned slightly. "Meaning what?" Poirot only shook his head. "Ah, we shall see. The candle burns twice, you see, once for truth and once for deception." That night, Poirot returned to the gallery. This time, he placed small strips of paper near the window and door, delicate traps for movement. He examined the candle closely under lamplight, noting a faint indentation near its base. He tapped it gently with his finger and smiled. At midnight, he waited again. The clock struck 12. Once more, the candle flared to life, a soft, silent flame in the darkness. But this time, Poirot did not remain still. He moved quickly toward the table, his eyes sharp, his mind alive with calculation. His hand brushed the portrait's frame, and his fingers found what he sought. A wire, thin, nearly invisible, running along the frame to a small mechanism concealed in the wood. A mechanism that sparked, timed precisely to the clock's chime. Poirot's lips curved into a knowing smile. When he turned, Finch was standing at the doorway, pale and trembling. "Monsieur Poirot," he stammered. "I heard. Is it true?" The candle again. "Yes," Poirot said softly, stepping aside. "But this time, my friend, it was not the spirit of Lord Haversham who lit the flame." Finch blinked, confused. "Then who?" Poirot's gaze lingered on the faint glow of the candle. "The question, my good Finch," he said quietly, "is not who lit the candle, but why someone wished us to believe it burned twice." The night wind whispered against the tall windows as Poirot watched the flame flicker, casting twin shadows on the wall. Two identical shapes, wavering, as though the candle truly burned twice. He smiled faintly, his eyes narrowing with thought. "The stage is set," he murmured. "Now, we shall see who dares step into the light." Chapter 2. The Ashes of Deceit. The morning after the second burning found Haversham Hall heavy with silence. It was not the silence of peace, nor the hush of grief. It was the silence of waiting, of walls that had heard too much, of hearts afraid to speak what they already knew. Hercule Poirot stood in the West Gallery, examining once more the portrait of Lord Henry Haversham. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, soft and pale, revealing 1,000 motes of dust dancing in its beams. The candle, now extinguished, stood upon the small table like a sentinel who had done its duty and awaited command. He touched the oak's surface gently. "So, mon ami," he murmured to the empty air, "you have burned twice, once by hand and once by deceit. But which hand was it that wished to deceive?" His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass of the portrait. Behind him, the door creaked, and a hesitant voice spoke. "Forgive me, Monsieur Poirot," said Lady Eleanor. "I could not rest. Have you discovered what it means? Why the candle burns so?" Poirot turned to face her. Her face was pale, drawn, the color of parchment. Grief had etched faint lines at the corners of her mouth. She looked smaller somehow, diminished not by sorrow, but by the weight of uncertainty. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "your candle burns not by ghostly will, but by design. There was a device, hidden in the frame of your husband's portrait. A most clever contrivance, wired to ignite the wick at the striking of midnight." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "A mechanism? You mean someone did this?" "Precisely. And someone who knew both the house and the habits of those within it." Lady Eleanor clasped her hands tightly. "But why would anyone do such a thing?" Poirot tilted his head. "To frighten, perhaps. To unsettle, or to draw attention away from something else. The human mind, when it seeks to conceal guilt, will often create diversions most elaborate." He paused. "Your husband, Lady Eleanor, he was not loved by all, I think." Her lips trembled. "Henry was a difficult man. He demanded obedience in all things. The servants feared him. Even his nephew, James, resented him. But surely no one would go so far." "Assuredly," Poirot said softly, "we cannot be certain. Yet in my experience, it is often not hatred that leads to crime, but fear." He let the words hang between them before continuing. "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, on the night your husband died, who was present in the house?" She closed her eyes, summoning memory. "Myself, Finch, Miss Whitby, Lucy the maid, and James. He had arrived unexpectedly that afternoon." "Ah, yes. The nephew who inherits a portion of the estate." Poirot smiled faintly. "How fortunate that he should appear so timely." Eleanor frowned. "You suspect James?" Poirot raised a hand. "I suspect only that coincidence is the most untrustworthy of allies." The hours drifted by. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping through the trees in long, mournful sighs. In the library, Poirot seated himself near the great fireplace, where the embers still glowed faintly. A small brass box sat upon the mantel, filled with ashes from the candles burned in the hall. He took one pinch between his fingers and studied it thoughtfully. The ash was dark, dense, but mixed within it was a faint trace of blue-gray powder, almost metallic. Poirot's brows lifted. At that moment, Finch entered quietly. "Would you care for tea, sir?" Poirot turned with a smile. "Ah, yes, tea. The Englishman's solution to every mystery, eh? But tell me, my friend, this powder here, who polishes the silver in this house?" "Lucy, sir," said Finch. "Every Thursday." "Why?" Poirot looked back to the ashes. "Because the powder here, it is the same as that used for cleaning silver, which means the candle was touched recently. Yes? Perhaps even prepared by someone accustomed to that task." Finch blinked. "Lucy? You think she—" Poirot held up a hand. "Non. I think nothing yet. But I observe." He rose, brushing the ash from his fingertips. An observation, Finch, is the spark that lights the truth. Poirot found Lucy in the conservatory, trimming the dead leaves from a collection of wilting orchids. She started when she saw him. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you gave me a fright." "I am most sorry, mademoiselle," he said gently. "You're Lucy, yes? You polish the silver." "Yes, sir. Every Thursday morning, as Lady Eleanor prefers." Poirot nodded. "You also tend to the candles in the house?" Her eyes darted nervously. "Yes, sir. I change them when they burn low." "And when was the candle beneath the portrait last replaced?" She frowned, thinking. "A few days before Lord Haversham passed. He was very particular about it, sir. Said the candle must never go out." Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. "Ah, he said that, did he? And why, do you recall?" "I don't know, sir. Only that he had it lit every night when he worked in the gallery. Said it helped him think." Poirot studied her carefully, the sincerity in her face, the tremor in her hands. She was frightened, yes, but not deceitful. "Merci, Lucy," he said softly. "You have been most helpful." As he turned to go, she called after him, voice trembling. "Sir, do you think it's true that his spirit walks? I've heard things at night. Footsteps. And last evening, I found ashes near the study door. But the fire there hasn't been lit in days." Poirot paused, his gaze sharpening. "Ashes, you say? Near the study?" "Yes, sir." He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps, mademoiselle, it is not only the candle that burns twice." That afternoon, Poirot visited the late lord's study. It was a dim, cluttered room, lined with books and papers in careless disarray. Upon the great mahogany desk lay a ledger, open, its last line unfinished, the pen still resting where the ink had dried. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something else, bitter, chemical. Poirot moved to the fireplace, kneeling to inspect the ashes there. Beneath the gray dust lay fragments of scorched paper, letters, perhaps, or documents hastily burned. He used his tweezers to lift a small scrap, still legible. "Transfer of holdings to James Haversham upon death." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he whispered. "The inheritance, it seems, was not so simple." He replaced the fragment, closing the ledger with quiet care. In that moment, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, behind him. "Curious, isn't it?" said a voice. "How even death can't keep Uncle Henry from meddling." Poirot turned. James Haversham stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, a cigarette between his fingers. "You enter very quietly, monsieur," Poirot said. "It is a useful talent, though not always an innocent one." James smiled faintly. "I wanted to see what you'd find. I hear you're quite the magician when it comes to unmasking secrets." "Not a magician," said Poirot. "Merely a student of human nature. And human nature, Monsieur Haversham, does not change, not even beneath an English title." James exhaled a thin stream of smoke. "So tell me, detective, do you believe in ghosts?" Poirot smiled. "I believe, monsieur, that ghosts are often the inventions of those who wish to conceal the living truth." James's gaze hardened. "Then I wish you luck finding it. You'll need it." He turned and strode away, leaving behind a faint trail of smoke and defiance. That evening, Poirot gathered all within the drawing room. Lady Eleanor, Clara Whitby, Finch, Lucy, and James. The fire crackled faintly, casting long shadows across the polished floor. "Mess Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm, "I have learned much today, enough, perhaps, to light one small corner of the truth. It is clear that the candle, this supposed ghostly sign, was not a miracle but a deception. A mechanism lit it, timed precisely to the clock's stroke." Lady Eleanor shuddered. "But why, Monsieur Poirot? What purpose could such a cruel trick serve?" "Ah," Poirot said softly, "that, madam, is the true flame, the purpose behind the act. Someone wished you to fear, to doubt, perhaps even to drive you from this house before you learned something you were not meant to see. He turned toward James. Monsieur, the night your uncle died, where were you? James's jaw tightened. In my room. I heard nothing. Poirot's gaze drifted toward Clara. And you, mademoiselle? I was writing letters, she said quickly. To London. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. Letters that required a telegram the next morning, yes? Her cheeks colored faintly. Yes. To the same correspondent. Poirot said nothing more, only nodded slowly. Then his eyes moved to Finch. And you, my good Finch, you heard footsteps near the gallery that night? Yes, sir. But I thought it was only Mr. James returning late. James's eyes flashed. That's absurd. I never. Please, said Poirot softly, raising a hand. Let us not quarrel. The truth, you see, burns slowly like the candle. But once lit, it consumes all that surrounds it. He looked toward the fire, his face reflective. Lord Haversham was a man who controlled everything, even his death, perhaps. I wonder, what was it he burned that night in his study? Eleanor looked startled. Burned? You mean? Yes, madam. The ashes remain, though the paper is gone. Something concerning his will, I believe. Perhaps a change, one that would have surprised those who expected a profit. His gaze fell on James again, steady, unblinking. James scoffed. You think I killed him? For money? My uncle was dying anyway. Poirot's voice was soft. And yet he might have lived 1 week longer. Long enough to sign the document that would leave you nothing. James's hand clenched. You can't prove that. Not yet, said Poirot quietly. But I will. The candle burns twice, monsieur. Once to illuminate the lie, and once to reveal the truth. He turned toward Lady Eleanor. For tonight, madam, I advise you to rest. Lock your doors. There will be another flame before dawn. I am certain of it. Eleanor's breath caught. Another? Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Someone will attempt again what they have begun. But this time, I shall be waiting. As the household retired, the wind rose outside, whistling through the chimneys like a mournful violin. Poirot sat alone in the west gallery, beneath the portrait shadow. The candle had been replaced by his order, but this time he had tampered with it himself, removing every trace of trickery. He waited in the dark. The clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3, and then a sound. Not the spark of a mechanism this time, but the faint scrape of a shoe against the marble floor. Poirot's eyes snapped open. A figure moved in the doorway, slow, deliberate, carrying something small and glinting in the half-light. The figure approached the portrait, bending low. Poirot rose silently behind. Bonsoir, he said softly. It is late, my friend, too late to light candles for the dead. The figure froze. The candle tumbled from their hand, clattering to the floor. Poirot reached for the lamp and turned it up. Light flooded the gallery, and the intruder's face was revealed. Clara Whitby. Her eyes were wide, her breath ragged. In her hand was a matchstick, trembling. Poirot, please, it's not what you think. Poirot regarded her calmly. Then, mademoiselle, you must tell me what is the truth. Chapter 3. The Second Flame. The gallery fell into a frozen silence. Only the faint crackle of the fallen match disturbed the stillness, its dying ember glowing like an accusation on the marble floor. Clara Whitby stood motionless before Hercule Poirot, her chest rising and falling with quick, frightened breaths. The lamplight caught the pale shimmer of tears at the corners of her eyes. I didn't mean, she began, her voice trembling. You don't understand. Poirot held up one immaculate hand. Mademoiselle, it is precisely my occupation to understand. What I do not yet see, I observe until it reveals itself. Now, he gestured toward the chair near the window. Please, seat. She hesitated, glancing toward the door as though weighing escape. But something in Poirot's calm gaze compelled her to obey. She sank into the chair, her shoulders slumping, the candle still lying where it had rolled to her feet. Poirot regarded her in silence for a long moment. The flickering lamp painted both their faces in gold and shadow. Then softly he spoke. "You came here in the dead of night to relight the candle, not to summon spirits, I think, but to rekindle something that has already gone out, yes." Clara's eyes glistened. "You don't know what it's been like in this house," she whispered. "The way my aunt sits in silence all day, the servants whispering, the smell of death that won't leave the rooms. I thought," her voice broke, "I thought if I lit it again, maybe she'd feel he was still watching over her, that it would comfort her." Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "A noble intention, perhaps. Yet you risk suspicion, fear. Why not tell Lady Eleanor what you meant to do?" Clara looked away. "Because she wouldn't have believed me. And because," she paused, swallowing hard, "because I lied. I told her I hadn't been near the gallery since the funeral. But I had." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Ah, and why this lie, mademoiselle?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Because of the letter. I found it here, under the portrait. It was addressed to me in my uncle's hand." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A letter?" She nodded, trembling. "The night he died, I came to speak with him. We argued. Horribly. I told him I wanted to leave England, to live my own life, not the one he dictated for me. He said I was foolish, ungrateful, that he'd spent too much already keeping me respectable. I left him in anger." She paused, breath catching. "When I came back hours later to apologize, he was dead." Poirot moved closer, his voice gentle. "And the letter? It said he had changed his will, that everything he once intended for me would go instead to my cousin James. But," her tone hardened slightly, "he added one strange line at the end, 'The candle will know the truth.'" Poirot raised his brows slightly. "Indeed, a curious phrase, is it not? And you believe this candle to hold some meaning beyond the literal." "I didn't know what to believe," she said, shaking her head. "But when I saw it light itself after he was buried, I thought perhaps he meant it as a sign, that I'd been forgiven, that the truth, whatever it was, would come out." Poirot nodded slowly. "So you came tonight to relight it yourself. But tell me, mademoiselle, did you not wonder how it had burned before?" "I thought it was fate," she said softly, "or madness, or both." Poirot's gaze softened. "Non, mademoiselle, not fate. Only hands more human than divine." She looked up sharply. "You mean someone else made it happen?" "Yes," Poirot said simply. "And I believe your uncle's words. The candle will know the truth. Were not poetic at all. They were a warning." He reached down, picked up the fallen candle, and held it to the light. "For the candle, you see, burns twice, once by the design of its maker, and once by the hand that betrays them." The door creaked open. Lady Eleanor entered, her face drawn with worry. "Clara? What's happening?" Finch said he saw lights in the gallery again. She stopped short as she saw Poirot holding the candle. "Oh, dear heaven! Be calm, Lady Eleanor," Poirot said softly. "There is no ghost here tonight. Only a frightened young woman with a heavy heart." Clara rose, wiping her eyes. "Aunt Eleanor, I didn't mean to frighten you. I only wanted—" But Lady Eleanor held up a hand. "I know, child, I know." Poirot watched them quietly, the tenderness between them a small flicker of warmth amid the chill. Yet his eyes, behind their gentleness, were sharp, always sharp. "Madam," he said after a moment, "your husband's study. I found evidence that papers were burned there. You recall nothing unusual that night?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. "I remember. Henry was angry. He had argued with James earlier in the evening. Something about money. When I retired, he was still in his study. I never saw him alive again. And you heard nothing? No disturbance?" Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. Only, she frowned, only the sound of the clock striking midnight. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, yes, midnight, the moment chosen by our mysterious flame. How precise, how poetic, and how convenient. He placed the candle back upon the table and turned toward the window, gazing into the storm outside. The more I learn of this case, he said softly, the more I am reminded that truth, like fire, consumes not only lies, but those who tend it unwisely. He looked over his shoulder. Lady Eleanor, I must see your husband's solicitor at once. May I have his name? Mr. Ashcombe, in London, she replied. He handled all of Henry's affairs. Poirot nodded. Très bien. I shall write him tonight. By tomorrow, perhaps, we shall know whose name was meant to be erased and whose to be restored. The next morning dawned gray and wet. The moors surrounding Haversham Hall were lost in mist. Poirot took breakfast alone, his thoughts quiet, his eggs untouched. Finch entered to pour his coffee. You are troubled, sir, Finch observed cautiously. Poirot smiled thinly. When one sees the pattern, but not yet the weaver, my friend, the mind cannot rest. Tell me, this James Haversham, does he keep accounts or papers here in the house? In the east wing, sir. A small room he uses as an office. Poirot rose. Ah, then perhaps we shall visit the east this morning, though not to follow the star. Finch blinked in confusion, but Poirot had already taken up his cane and hat. James's office was a smaller, plainer chamber than his uncle's study, but no less telling. Papers littered the desk, along with an open ledger and an uncorked bottle of brandy. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and arrogance. Poirot glanced at the ledger. Ah, numbers, always so innocent, until they are made to dance. He leafed through it idly, then paused at one entry, a transfer to an account in London marked a Whitby. His brows arched. Whitby, Clara Whitby. At that moment, James entered the room. Looking for something, Poirot? Poirot smiled mildly. Only enlightenment, monsieur. And I find it often comes in the most unexpected places. James's gaze flicked toward the open ledger. You've no right to be in here. Perhaps not, Poirot said. And yet, rights are curious things. They're so easily claimed, so easily lost. Much like inheritances. James snorted. If you're suggesting I tampered with my uncle's will, you'll find nothing to prove it. The old man made his choices long before I came. Ah, but did he? Poirot's tone sharpened just slightly. It seems, monsieur, that he transferred money to your cousin before his death. A generous gesture, and an odd one, if he intended to disinherit her. James froze. That was a loan. She asked for help. Poirot's gaze was cool. And you agreed? Out of kindness. James's lips tightened. We were close once, before my uncle turned her against me. Poirot's voice lowered. Close or complicit? James's jaw clenched. Watch yourself, Poirot. But Poirot only smiled. Ah, yes. It is the guilty who so often warn the detective. He replaced the ledger gently. I think, monsieur, that this house is filled not only with ghosts of the dead, but ghosts of the living, of love turned bitter, of ambition turned cruel. He bowed slightly and left the room. By evening, a telegram arrived. Finch brought it to Poirot as he sat in the library, studying the portrait of Lord Henry once more. Poirot tore open the envelope, scanning the brief message. Ashcombe confirms alteration to will and signed. Entire estate still left to Lady Eleanor. Witness died before revision complete. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, he murmured. So the ink dried, but not the signature. Then who had reason to fear discovery? He folded the telegram and rose, moving to the fire. Lady Eleanor inherits all. James inherits nothing. Clara receives only pity. And yet the candle burns again and again, as though some unseen hand seeks to rewrite the story. He turned toward Finch. Send word to all. We shall dine together tonight. There is one last conversation to be had before the final flame. Dinner at Haversham Hall was a strained affair. The storm outside had returned, rattling the windows with cold rain. The candles flickered along the table like silent witnesses. Poirot sat at the head, Lady Eleanor to his right, Clara to his left. James sat opposite, his expression carefully composed. Finch and Lucy moved about quietly, serving, listening. Poirot spoke little through the meal, though his eyes never ceased to move, noting each glance, each silence, each tremor of the hand. When dessert was cleared, he set down his spoon and leaned back. "Madam," he said softly to Lady Eleanor, "you recall your husband's final words? His last note, 'The candle will know the truth.' I believe he was correct. The candle has told me everything." James smirked faintly. "And what truth would that be?" "That you, monsieur," Poirot said quietly, "did not kill your uncle. You lack the imagination." James stiffened. "What are you implying?" Poirot's gaze drifted toward Clara. "But someone else did possess imagination and desperation. A woman young enough to believe she could light her own destiny with deceit." Clara's face went pale. "No." Poirot raised a hand. "Come, mademoiselle. I do not accuse you of murder, only of concealment. You found your uncle dead, of natural causes, but you believe yourself to blame because of your argument. You feared your aunt's reproach, your cousin's triumph. So when you found the letter mentioning the will, you destroyed it, burned it in the study, perhaps?" She trembled. Yes, I burned it. I was terrified." Poirot nodded. "And afterward, to cover your action, you invented the ghost, the candle that burns itself. But someone discovered your little trick and used it." Lady Eleanor whispered. "Used it? How?" Poirot turned his gaze toward James. "Monsieur here." He realized Clara's deception and saw how useful it could be. He installed the mechanism in the portrait to make the candle light itself at midnight and spread whispers of haunting, hoping to drive his aunt to madness, to flee the house, to forfeit her inheritance. James's face went rigid. "That's a lie." Poirot's voice was calm, but sharp as glass. "Non, monsieur. It is the truth. The wire was of a type used for radio sets, of which you keep several in your room. The timing device bore your initials, and your brandy glass, mon ami, carries traces of the same silver polish used to disguise the powder in the candle's base." James leapt to his feet. "You can't prove." "I can," Poirot interrupted softly, "because you forgot the simplest thing. The candle burns twice, and so do lies. Once for those who tell them, and once for those who believe." He stepped forward, his voice rising just enough to fill the room. "You build a ghost to steal an inheritance. But ghosts, Monsieur Haversham, are greedy things. They always come back for their creators." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then James slumped back into his chair, his face drained of color. The storm outside crashed like applause for the truth laid bare. Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. "Madam, you have your peace. Justice will take its course. But remember your husband's words. The candle will know the truth." "Now at last it does," Lady Eleanor whispered. "And what of Clara?" Poirot smiled faintly. "She, madam, has burned enough. We shall let her flame rest." Later that night, as the police carriage rumbled away into the storm, Poirot stood once more in the West Gallery. The candle remained unlit now, its wick blackened, spent. He spoke softly, almost himself. "There are no ghosts in Haversham Hall, only the echoes of pride, of fear, of the small deceits that grow into tragedies." Finch appeared behind him. "Will you be leaving in the morning, sir?" "Yes," Poirot said. "The case is closed. The candle burns no more." He turned, casting one last glance at the portrait, and for the briefest moment, the light caught the painted eyes of Lord Henry Haversham. They seemed almost to glimmer. Poirot smiled. "Mon ami." Perhaps you were right, after all. Perhaps truth, like flame, never truly dies. Chapter 4. The Flame That Never Dies. The morning after the storm broke clear and cold over the moors. The mist that had haunted the hills for days finally lifted, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Haversham Hall. Timid at first, like a guest uncertain of its welcome, Poirot stood by the window of the west gallery, his reflection framed against the pale light. His small figure was still, his hands folded neatly before him, his eyes thoughtful as they rested on the candle, now extinguished, its wax hardened, its story complete. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Lady Eleanor, her silver hair pinned neatly, though her eyes still carried the shadow of sleeplessness. "You are leaving, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked softly. He turned, smiling gently. "Yes, madam. The train to London waits for no man, not even for Hercule Poirot." She managed a faint smile. "You brought clarity to this house. I don't know whether to thank you or to grieve for what's been revealed." Poirot inclined his head. "The truth, madam, is a light that warms, but it burns also. You must allow both sensations if you are to heal." Lady Eleanor walked slowly toward the table where the candle lay. Her gloved fingers traced the rim of the brass holder. "I keep thinking of Henry. He would have hated what's happened here. All this deceit, this greed." Poirot's voice softened. "It is strange, is it not, how men spend their lives gathering fortune, power, and pride, and yet, when the end comes, they are remembered most for the love they withheld." Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened. "He wasn't always kind, but he loved this house, and in his way he loved us." Poirot nodded. "The Englishman and his home, a bond as sacred as any. But sometimes, madam, the home itself becomes the prison of memory." He stepped closer, his gaze tender. "Sell it, perhaps, or open it anew. Let others bring laughter to these halls again, for the ghost will fade only when the silence does." She looked up at him with quiet gratitude. "You speak as though you've seen this before." Poirot smiled faintly. But of course, the settings change. A manor in Devon, a lodge in Cornwall, a train across Europe. Yet always there is the same story, the small flame of human folly, burning brightly until someone must snuff it out. He took her hand briefly and bowed. "Courage, madam. You have endured worse than truth." Later, Poirot descended the great staircase with his valise in hand. Finch stood waiting by the door, his usual composure softened by something like admiration. "You'll forgive me for saying so, sir," Finch said, "but it was a marvel watching you work. I never saw a man see so much from so little." Poirot chuckled quietly. "It is not the eyes, mon ami, that see. It is the order of the little gray cells. They arrange the chaos of the world into pattern." Finch smiled awkwardly. "Still, I'd rather have your eyes than mine, sir." Poirot's mustache twitched upward. "Then you would have to endure the sight of human nature in all its untidiness. Trust me, monsieur, it is not always a pleasant view." Outside, the carriage waited, its black paint glistening with dew. Poirot stepped out onto the gravel, the cold morning air crisp and clean after the long rain. Clara Whitby was there, standing beside the carriage, her coat buttoned up to her chin, eyes red but resolute. "I wanted to see you off," she said softly. Poirot regarded her kindly. "And I, mademoiselle, am glad you did. You are not the same frightened child who stood trembling in the gallery." "I suppose I've learned," she said quietly. "The truth hurts less than fear." "Ah," he said approvingly. "You will make a philosopher yet." She smiled faintly. "I've decided to go to London. Start again. Perhaps teach or write. Anything that isn't haunted." Poirot's eyes warmed. "Good. Leave the ghost to the past, mademoiselle. The living have need of your light." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Monsieur Poirot, do you ever tire of it? The lies, the death, the endless search for truth. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the distant moors, bathed in soft sunlight. At times, he admitted, "But then, I think of this. If no one tended the flame of justice, even for a little while, the world would fall into darkness." And so, he smiled, "The candle must burn again." She nodded slowly. "Then I hope it burns long." Poirot tipped his hat. "Adieu, Mademoiselle Whitby. May your second flame burn brighter than your first." The carriage rolled away, its wheels crunching over the gravel. Clara stood watching until it disappeared down the long drive, the morning wind tugging gently at her hair. The train from Devon to London was half empty that afternoon. Poirot sat alone in his compartment, the rhythmic clatter of wheels beneath him soothing in its precision. Outside, the landscape slipped by, fields, hedgerows, cottages, each dissolving into the next like memories fading into time. He drew from his pocket the small brass candle holder, which Lady Eleanor had insisted he keep as a token of gratitude. He studied it closely, running a finger along its rim. "Strange," he murmured to himself, "how a single object may hold so many meanings. To one, a relic; to another, a weapon; to a third, a symbol of forgiveness." He placed it gently on the seat beside him and leaned back, closing his eyes. The rhythmic sound of the train lulled him into a half-dream. Flashes of faces, voices, moments from the case replaying in the theater of his mind. He saw Clara's trembling hands, James's defiance, Lady Eleanor's sorrow, and behind them all, the candle burning quietly, endlessly, consuming, revealing, illuminating. Poirot's thoughts drifted to other cases. The murder of Roger Ackroyd, the Hollow, 5 Little Pigs, times when truth had come too late or cost too much. He smiled faintly in the stillness. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he whispered to the memory of his old companion. "You would have said I'm sentimental, and perhaps you would be right." He opened his eyes again. The afternoon light flickered across the window pane like the last dance of a dying flame. That evening, in a quiet corner of London, Poirot sat by the fire in his small flat. A newspaper lay open beside him, its headline announcing heir charged in Devon estate fraud. Poirot uncovers truth at Haversham Hall. He sipped his tea, perfectly brewed, perfectly measured. On the mantel above the fire, the candle holder gleamed softly in the golden light. Poirot rose, took a fresh candle from his drawer, and placed it within. He struck a match, and for a moment he paused, watching the tiny flame leap to life. "Non," he murmured with a smile. "This time, let it burn only for peace." He set the match aside and sat back, hands folded, eyes half closed, as the candle flickered gently in the warm stillness. And so, another mystery fades into the quiet corridors of time. For every crime leaves behind not only clues, but echoes, faint as candlelight, enduring as memory. Hercule Poirot moves on, as he always does, the keeper of small truths, the tender of tiny flames. For in every darkness, there must be one who sees, one who remembers that the candle burns twice, once for the dead and once for the living. If you've journeyed this far with Hercule Poirot, perhaps you, too, have glimpsed the light behind the mystery. Tell me, what would you have done if the candle burned in your name? Subscribe for more mysteries, more secrets, and more nights where truth flickers like a flame in the dark. Until next time, keep your eyes sharp, your mind sharper, and remember, the candle always burns twice.